Did you know that 25% of all marine species are found in, on, and around coral reefs, and more than 500 million people depend on a healthy coral reef for their food, income, and coastal protection? Now, due to climate change, destructive fishing practices, and pollution, coral reefs are dying off. And scientists actually estimate that at this rate, 90% of coral reefs will disappear in the next 30 years. Now, coral reef restoration efforts are happening where divers are going out, they're gluing coral frags onto dying reefs. But what does that look like, and what are some of the challenges that those divers are facing? What's up, Reef Fanatics? In today's episode, we are talking about an adhesive called SeaTak, and maybe you've heard of it or you've seen it at a coral convention like Reefapalooza. But today, joining me from Muscle Polymers is David and April. David and April, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hey, Joey.
Hi, Joey.
Nice to be on.
Great
Nice
to be
having you. So today we're going to be talking about SeaTak. It is an adhesive for many different things, but as it relates to the aquarium industry or the hobby, it is an adhesive that has some special properties to it, or there's a special story behind it. But before we get to that, David and April, let us know who you are and what it is that you do with Muscle Polymers.
I'm April Hayes. I've been with Muscle Polymers for almost 4 years, and I've worked with some startups, and I'm excited to work with, be a part of SeaTak and this development for core restoration. Been working with Dave for probably the last 3 years in core restoration, and we've been working with core restoration practitioners all around the world and designing this adhesive for core restoration purposes to help with reef loss around the world.
Very cool. And David?
Yeah, that's great. Hi, all. My name is David Schmidt. I am one of the executives over here at Muscle Polymers. We started this business back in 2019, commercializing the academic research out of Purdue University as to why mussels stick to coral reefs or barnacles stick to ships, and yet it takes a jackhammer to get them off. So we've been building this little piece of business here, and we now have a myriad of activity sets that run the full gamut, from industrial to biomedical to orthopedic to reef restoration and even the reef hobbyist.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's something that's really cool, is that SeaTak is being used for all those different things, like, and just researching what SeaTak is about, or how it got started. Like you mentioned, the mussels, how they stick to the rocks or they stick to the reefs, like studying that and using the idea of these animals that secrete this glue to hold themselves down so strongly is kind of that's what's behind this SeaTak, correct?
Yes, yes, indeed.
So what is the story behind SeaTak, and how did that get started? Because like you guys mentioned, you're fairly new company, but building this thing out to help with with a lot of different things, but coral restoration being one of the top things.
So what is Muscle Polymers? We are the world's leader in catechol polymers for biomedical, for industrial, for defense applications. We do a whole bunch of different types of chemistries. We incorporate these molecules into different formulations. So the takeaway here is we're developing one molecule that has many uses. So as you appropriately pointed out, a lot of this research is dedicated to why that mussel sticks to a coral reef. So here we have the blue-footed mussel, and when the blue-footed mussel wants to attach itself to an object or so, it sends out a tendril, and that tendril, at the end of that tendril, is a foot. Within that foot, it excretes a protein at time of use. Within that protein, there's an amino acid. Within the amino acid, there is a catechol compound. And that catechol compound is responsible for that underwater bonding. And so what that actually is DOPA. And if you look at this middle of the slide, you'll see a highlighted pink thing with a couple of hydroxyl groups that are hanging off it. That is actually the catechol molecule. We used that as the starting point to develop a biomimetic of a polycatechol styrene, a biomimetic copying something that happens naturally in nature. And it turns out that this polycatechol styrene is super simple and super powerful. We have our areas of corporate focus, and we've been prioritizing them on market size, ease of entry. And so there's an industrial segment, there's a coating segment, there is a dental and biomedical segment, and I'm including the reef restoration activity sets in this this industrial segment. So, you asked the question, what's the story behind SeaTak? And SeaTak is, in fact, a world's underwater adhesive formulated product. What we are in the business of doing is building the business of connecting healthy ecosystems. We're commercializing this biomimetic adhesive system to allow for faster outplanting, stronger reefs. We have better toxicity profiles relative to the next best alternative. So we all know that reefs are in population collapse, largely because of global warming, higher temperatures, even just damage onto the reefs. It's been estimated that the economic damages for the loss of reefs exceed $30 billion a year. It's it's amazing. So early on in our efforts, we saw a solicitation from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, NOAA, about activities that could speed outplanting. So NOAA got together with the defense contractor Draper to try to identify what the rate limiting steps were. And after quite an exhaustive study, anecdotally, it came down to the adhesive. And this is a direct quote from Tom Moore, who at the time was NOAA's Coral Reef Restoration Program Manager. Tom has since moved on and is engaged in a very large reef restoration project. But his quote was, while it may seem a simple issue, finding a better adhesive that has the potential to have a 3 times efficiency is the most direct way to affect coral outplanting. So how is that done today? So it's largely a microfragmentation exercise. When you're propagating corals, you're going to propagate them similar to the way you're going to propagate plants. You take a healthy cutting, you attach that healthy cutting to some sort of substrate, a coral plug in this case. You take and you nurture that in an ideal environment. And then once it's big enough, they commission a boat, a captain, several divers. They take these trays of materials and they dive over the side and they mix adhesives underwater and they physically plant these on the reefs. So if you look at, so this is the way they do today. So some of the issues that we had to deal with when thinking about this is while attaching a coral fragment to a coral plug, there's poor wet adhesion. Now, people have developed techniques over the years and they've gotten pretty good at it, but still there is poor wet adhesion. Similarly, a 2-part epoxy mixed also has poor wet adhesion when sticking to a reef. They both also are toxic. There's an irritation element to it. There's a toxicity profile associated with it. And this middle picture that you see is a cloud of amines that are being dispersed in the water as you mix the part A's and parts B together. So you've got a couple of problems with the toxicity irritating or even killing the corals that you're trying to replant.
Oh, wow.
So the other problem with the epoxy is it's clumsy, it's slow, and it's expensive. So picture yourself as a diver. You've got a part A and a part B, and it's like a putty, and you're spending 5 minutes, 10 minutes mixing this piece of putty underwater until you can start to press it and mechanically wedge it into the little nooks and crevices of the reef. So in order to scale with an adhesive, you need a non-toxic wet binding adhesive, and the Muscle Polymers polycatechol styrene biomimetic would be a perfect fit for that.
Yeah, because I imagine that being a diver, that's the last thing on your mind, right? That you want to get the corals that you spent all this time setting up on their coral frags and getting them to a healthy point. You're diving down to the rock. The last thing you want to do is mix this epoxy together and try to get it down on the rock work.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly correct. So if you think about this for a little moment, a diver can probably plant 6 to 10 coral fragments in a dive before they run out of air. So let's just take the factor of 10 minutes. You need to mix your epoxies together for about 5 minutes, but you still also need to press it in, and you still need to shape it. And so what was it take 10 minutes to do a planting? So at 6 times 10 is 60 minutes, and a typical tank at 30 feet, will give you about an hour's worth of air, and then that diver has to come up. So there's an expensive component to that, and that expensive component is labor. So we're going to get into this in a little bit here, but if we could develop a system that effectively was squirt, stick, and go, you could increase the rate of outplanting by as many as, say, 100 times. And so that was the basis or the genesis of how we got started with this.
Fascinating. Yeah, because like you said, your oxygen being down there, you want to save time with planning and something that's much more effective and something that you can work with that's more pliable, which is something that I'm sure we'll talk more about. But SeaTak is much more pliable, and the fact that you can work with it underwater is
Yep. So what sort of scale is needed here? I think about the global problem, and if you think about the industrial scale of what's needed, industrial scale production is going to be required. So in 2019, less than 1% of the total reef area was restored by Moat Coral Restoration Foundation. And, Florida represents a tiny fraction of what the global need is. So there were 60,000 fragments planted in 2019. So that was probably a metric ton of epoxy. If we think about what that is in comparison, what you have, each coral fragment has an area. So let's just assume that each fragment, when planted, would need a square foot of space to grow out into. That would say roughly 37 million fragments would cover the area of 1.3 square miles, which is Central Park in New York City. So you would need 37 million fragments to just restore the area of Central Park. Remember that in 2019, only 60,000 were even planted. But let's translate that to the area that's been committed to in Florida and Florida alone. So if we do that, you notice that Central Park just went really small, but the
Wow.
Florida Reef area covers 231 square miles. By comparison, that is the area of Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx all added up. But that's Florida.
Mhm.
What about the Great Barrier Reef? Well, the Great Barrier Reef restoration activities is 134,000 square miles.
Wow.
That is the entirety of the Northeast plus New Jersey and New York. So what's being done today doesn't even fill the pond in Central Park. What the need is greater than the entirety of the Northeast of the United States. So we're talking a need of material at rail car scale.
Yeah.
So anyway, that gives you an idea of how big this problem is to be solved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like a lot of people may not be thinking of just how big of a problem this is. I mean, when we talk about people that people that depend on the reefs to protect, like the coastal protection that reefs provide. I mean, just seeing the scale there that you've shown, it's very important. It's very important. And there's a huge need, especially for a way to be faster and more efficient at planting new corals.
Right, exactly.
Some people might think, oh, well, what about, cement, using cement for an adhesive? We're talking about adhesive to adhesive. So we're talking about
Mhm.
epoxy cyanoacrylate, and in that realm is SeaTak. So yeah, cements are part of it. And we're looking for ways to kind of bridge between bringing down the price, making it be able to go much faster, quicker, efficiently, because there's lots of stuff we can do on land.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
and then one thing though is like the coral reef die off though is sometimes it's happening quicker. Well, this is kind of what we're already talking about, but that's happening quicker than what we can plant out there. Um,
Sure.
Yeah.
And so largely at the beginning of this effort, and largely due to the efforts of April, today we have 50 active reef restoration activity sets going on all over the world, and some are having some huge successes, others are having challenges, and not to say, but it is it's a big effort.
mhm.
We have activities in the Caribbean, in Hawaii, in South America, in Japan, in New Zealand, in Australia, in Taiwan, and the lists really go on and on. I would encourage anybody who's using SeaTak to take the time to learn about it, because it is a different adhesive system. It behaves differently. And this is one thing that we do find is that is the reliance on intuition is often what people resort to because it's what they know.
Mhm.
But again, all
Every
right.
every one of our practitioners uses SeaTak a little differently. So
Okay.
Yep.
it's figuring out what works for you.
All right. So as we, this is a reminder of how this microfragmentation goes. We started to develop a prototype adhesive system where we would attach, a combination of polycatechol styrene as well as other formulated products, and so we found a formulation that adheres to a wide range of wet surfaces, limestones, calcium carbonates, corals, with minimal surface preparation needed. Yes, sometimes we need a brush, but oftentimes we can adhere directly through biofilm. The system would need to set up And our system sets up a bit slower than most. It was intentionally designed to be a slow set adhesive,
Okay.
and that the scale up was possible to do at global scale. And so the NOAA put out a list of target um, quality metrics that we needed to hit. And we've hit every single one of those targets. It has to work in seawater. It has to be negatively buoyant. There has to be minimum surface prep. It has to be sticky and tacky and grabs and blah, 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 blah. The list kind of goes on.
Yeah.
We compared the SeaTak to other to cyanoacrylates and epoxies and ran side-by-side tests with our scientists. And this is a stoplight chart of how SeaTak performed. So we ended up with a go-to-market strategy and looked at two segments, the reef restoration community, as well as the marine hobbyist aquarium space. Now, in the reef restoration community, it's largely characterized by non-governmental organizations, as well as teams of people that just want to do good. So what we've learned in that is that there's 3 or 4 really well-funded reef restoration groups that are out there. 98% of the rest, however, are challenged with underfunding and trying to make trade-offs on, do I buy adhesive or do I staff up more people so that I can do more outplanting? So we're trying to address those. But in our commercial side of things, we said, interestingly enough, the saltwater hobbyist market, the coral saltwater hobbyist market worldwide is it's just under $4 billion worth of market size. In the United States alone, the saltwater aquarium market is a $700 million market. Now, not all of that is adhesive. That's also all the other components that go along with that. But it said something very real, that, you know what, we could build a very nice little business by having a hobbyist product. And we launched the SeaTak in Q1 of 2023 to the to the coral hobbyist market, largely by attending trade shows. And so here's a little slide for some of our reef restoration activities, since this is what we're talking about. And mind you, we have 50 of these ongoing. We have the National Taiwan Ocean University, which has their coral nurturing programs. What they're doing is they are repurposing abalone farms that they'd cut into the north coast of Taiwan and making them coral nurseries. April, would you like to tell the story about what happened with our National Taiwan Ocean University?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. So Taiwan had been nurturing several corals, and they took 21. These corals are actually quite large. They're the size of your hand. And they outplanted those in, was it?
And that was in April of 2023, wasn't that?
Yeah, it was. Thank you. Shortly after came the Mawar typhoon. I think it was the beginning of May. And they were really concerned with how many would survive, because obviously that took a long time for those corals to be nurtured to that large. And when they went out a couple weeks later to assess damages, they were very pleased to find that every single one of their aquapores were still attached and securely in place. So since then, they've, of course, outplanted many more, and they are excited to continue to use SeaTak because of the success that they have found with it.
That's cool. Yeah. So the size, so coral the size of your hand,
Yeah.
using SeaTak directly down in the reefs or the rock work there.
Yeah.
This huge storm comes, crashing waves. What would typically maybe destroy a reef or coral, these corals are
Absolutely.
completely fine.
Absolutely.
This is
Yeah.
right, and this is a picture of one of those corals that aquaporas that they had outplanted, and there's the tag,
Okay.
and this is the adhesive that they used to glue that coral fragment. Now, this was in April of 2023. Here's a picture from June of 2023 after the typhoon came through. And you can see these acroporas are still attached to the reefs. Now, there's some broken fingers, but they're still attached to the reefs.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. And there's a short little video here which I can share.
Okay, and so that's them diving down, checking
Yeah.
the corals and seeing just how sturdy and how strong they are still on the rock work there.
Yeah. Cleaning them off. Yeah.
Cleaning them. Okay,
So,
very cool.
yeah. One thing I did notice here, and I wanted to point this out, is to you and your listeners,
Mhm.
the corals and the coral polyps, they like to grow. They like SeaTak. They like to grow over top, unlike the cyanoacrylates, unlike the epoxies. So if you notice this adhesive that we see here on a freshly planted acropora, here you got the adhesive, and here you've got the coralline algae that's already growing over top of that. We also find that coral polyps grow over top of the adhesive, and this was only in 2 months.
Okay,
Yeah.
pretty quick. Pretty quick.
Here's a image of a microfragmented in a tank, and right here at the bottom is where the SeaTak is adhering this to the rock. And if you look, you've got these coral polyps that have just grown right over top of them. And then here's another one over here on this side.
Very nice. Yeah, so the coral tends to it's adapting to it, and it likes it just fine. It's not bothering the coral because the coral's growing more and covering that adhesive.
Yes. And if you propagate corals, you'll find that corals have a tendency to grow out before they grow up.
Right. Yep.
The other thing that you might find interesting is that one of the reasons that we think the corals are doing well with the SeaTak is because it's highly loaded with calcium carbonate. And it off-gases just a little bit of carbon dioxide, which they actually like.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get into next is the toxicity of it, or what happens once it's applied in the water. Because I was watching some videos earlier and I noticed you guys were talking about little bubbles that you might see form up or as it's curing, and those are just off-gassing CO2.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe you have a demonstration, and we'll talk about like how is we've touched on SeaTak's intended to be used in the application, but we can take a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so here we have some SeaTak, and I'm going to open up the box here and pull this out, and for any of your listeners, definitely read the instructions. Read the instructions.
Instructions are important.
Yes, but take your tube of glue, open up, puncture your seal. I'm going to puncture that seal. Okay, and now I'm going to squeeze out some SeaTak. There we go. I'm squeezing out some SeaTak here. This is super sticky and tacky. It is super sticky and tacky even underwater. You see how tacky that is? Okay. Let me do and clean my fingers off here for a minute.
Yep. Cleanup's important.
What's that?
Cleanup is important.
Yep.
Cleanup is extremely important in SeaTak. I'm glad you mentioned cleanup, because in an uncured state, you can clean up with normal things like isopropanol or acetone. Once it's cured, it is permanent. So unfortunately, we had one user that got SeaTak on her $3,000 underwater camera. Thankfully, it was on a decorative space, but it's now a permanent fixture of her camera equipment.
Wow.
All right. So I've just poured some of that water into a small beaker here, and I'm going to take a tongue depressor, of which I'm going to squeeze out some SeaTak. Okay. So there we got some SeaTak. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push this under the water, and I'm going to adhere it to the side of this beaker. And then watch what I do with this. Underwater, push to the side. Ready?
Love it.
It's immediately sticky and tacky. And the neat thing about this is I can remove it, put it somewhere else, and it's still sticky and tacky underwater.
Yeah, that's insane. But at this first stage, though, it's still pliable. You're still able to work with it.
Correct.
Yeah. You have about
Correct.
20 to 30 minutes of work time where you can reanimate it and reapply it. So what we mean with reanimate is like reworking the material around, because any part that water touches is starting to activate, is starting to cure. So after that 20 or 30 minute time, you'll start seeing a little shell beginning to happen where it won't be tacky. So to get that tackiness back in that 20, 30 minutes, you stir it
Kinda
up
gotta
and
mix it.
it
Yeah,
goes tacky again. If you continue to do that, it'll start turning into what people tell us is like bubble gum. It's just like not sticky.
gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
So, granted, this is a dead fragment. Okay, I'm going to take this dead fragment and I'm going to put it in that water there. So I'm going to take my little, where am I? I'm going to take my little coral plug here. I'm going to, put some adhesive onto that coral plug. I'm going to bring out my thing. I'm going to shake it off. I'm just going to dab it dry, and then I'm just going to stick it right in the middle. And there we go.
Nice.
Yeah. And now I'm going to take this and put this in a nurture. Now I can sit here and shape the adhesive a little bit if I want to.
Right. Create a little mound for it.
Yeah, if you want to. Or some people have texturized it. They put a little sand on the bottom. You can do that as well. But then what you do is you take this and you put it underwater in a nurture in an environment where it's will grow and develop. And once it gets big enough. So that's how your basics of how that happens. Now we have developed a tube of glue of SeaTak. We've got 3 different product variations right now, and we can develop other ones. We have the standard caulk tube, of which the reef restoration practitioners are using caulk guns, to which they will dive and squirt, stick, and go. And we also have another version of this, which is a syringe tube. And that syringe tube, you can take an 8-gauge needle. All right. I'm going to pull off the protective backing of this. And that goes into a gun of sorts so that you have precision work. So SeaTak works really, really well in a lot of different environments. It's not just for attaching corals to coral plugs, but it's for attaching rockscapes and reef structures. It's an excellent gap filler. People have used it for other things. It's just a really nice, good adhesive that has a plenty of other applications. That's what we have to show.
One of the questions we get is, what happens when I put SeaTak on underwater and it doesn't stick? And what we've suggested to some of those people is to use actually SeaTak, wipe a little surface onto whatever you're trying to put it onto, so you get like a primed area of SeaTak, because SeaTak is a mechanical grab. So if you can, get it on into some grooves, SeaTak sticks to SeaTak really great. So sometimes that's helpful, and people find that that's really efficient for underwater adhesions. And to that, I know we've also done some product development too.
Cool. Yeah, because the demonstration, it bonds very well in the water, but you're still gluing the frag to the plug outside of the water. But like you said, the caulking gun is used by divers to travel down to the actual reefs and to work that right onto the rock work.
Right.
So rubbing a little bit of SeaTak on that surface to get it grabbing, and then applying more, and then planting your coral.
Yep.
Right, because
that
remember we
talked
about because it's activated by water, that you get that initial grab, but as you continue to work with it, you might lose some of that grab. So to either if you can't reanimate it, then use the mechanical grab of it and allow the adhesive to be the sticky place for new adhesive. If that makes any sense there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So here are
just
some of the products here, like you've showed, but here's some pictures of them as well. So SeaTak's super unique, using the proteins of mussels and making the synthetic adhesive from that. That's just really fascinating as well. And so we've already touched on what makes SeaTak unique from other adhesives for our aquarium and coral restoration. But if we want to touch a little bit more on, like, for example, a lot of hobbyists are already using super glue. So as long as it's gel super glue, it's cyanoacrylate. I mean, that's what I've been using for a long time. One of the things that I've fall into whenever you're putting your coral on the frag plug with super glue, it wants to give way or fall over. You have to kind of hold it there for like 30 seconds or more, and then activate it with seawater. But SeaTak, you're just putting a mound of glue on there, like you demonstrated, and sticking it right on.
Yeah.
Already got
That's
that.
the nice thing about SeaTak. It's kind of a hybrid of both worlds, where you get the structure and the tackiness.
Yep. One thing I do want to make clear, though, and is that, okay, so SeaTak is a formulated product. It was inspired by the mussel proteins. It is not the actual mussel protein. So I want to make that clear. It's a formulated product that is highly loaded with calcium carbonate, and that calcium carbonate is in fact what the reefs are made of. Now, we do in conjunction with the formulated SeaTak, we also have pure polycatechol styrene in a solvent carrier to be used as a primer in those situations where you might be super challenged to get stickiness underwater, where you might want to take a PCS primer and prime the coral plug. And then once this dries, you now are using it in conjunction with the SeaTak. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, very cool.
Good. So as I've said before, we have and I do want to come back to well, actually, let's just jump to it because you asked the question. People use cyanoacrylates, and it's been around. People have figured out how to make them work, and whether it's a direct Gorilla Glue or whether it's a gelatinized, more of a gel glue, it's still a cyanide group, and it still is toxic to corals. Oftentimes, people see the bottom third of their coral frag burn because of the cyanoacrylate and the toxicity. They're often referred to as lollipop corals. Where the bottom is burned but the top is still good. So yes, if cyanoacrylate works and you know how to work with it and you know how to work around it, great. Every adhesive has its applications and its users. So if it's working for you, fine. But if it's not, give SeaTak a try. The other thing about so you've got the toxicity, you've got the floating strands. So sometimes when you try to glue with the cyanoacrylate, you get these little bubbly kind of strands that pull out, and you end up with cyanoacrylate everywhere on your fingers. And it's one of those things you have to deal with and have to clean up all the time. Another thing you're going to run into with cyanoacrylate is taking that tube of glue actually underwater. If you dispense that, the water will cross-link the cyanoacrylate and then render your tube non-usable.
Yeah,
the whole tube.
And that leads into a question that I had was with SeaTak, if they're taking these big caulking guns down in the ocean with them, are they using the entire tube? Like, is it going to dry out your tube of SeaTak? Like, how does that work?
You're able to use what you need, and then we recommend putting a blob on the end so that it can cure. But you should be able to pull off that blob, kind of like a cork, and then be able to reuse it again later.
So as long as the rest of the stuff inside the tube has not seen moisture, it will still be fine. Yeah. So I'm just going to restate what April just said. What we have found works really well is when I'm done and I haven't finished using my whole caulk tube, I will dispense a blob at the end of the tube here and allow that to cure. Oftentimes I use a 3M sticky note to have that blob stick to, because once that's cured and I go to use it again, I grab that blob and I twist it and I just yank it and I pull it out, much like I would pull a cork out of a bottle of wine, and everything in here is still usable. Okay. I do have several people that end up, and I do it too, end up gluing the cap back onto the tube, and and they can feel that inside it's still good, but the tube's plugged.
Yeah.
Right. So what you do there is either you use a pick and work the pick out, or take a small drill bit, because it's only cured 1/8 of an inch down. So you can drill into it. Now you've got your tube again. Another person, instead of doing that, what she did, and she's a reef person, she took toothpick and she poked the toothpick here and then squeezed it. Squeezed it like squeezed it, and then when she went over on this side and poked one over there and squeezed some out, went over on this side, and she ended up using the whole thing, much like you would exhaust a toothpaste tube.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, that's good to know that you cap the end of it and it stays good.
Yep.
I don't know how many bottles of super glue that I've just kind of wasted throwing frags down to coral plugs because of that. Um,
Well, what we've a couple of tips on that.
Yeah.
Clean your threads.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, use acetone or ethanol or isopropanol. Clean your threads. Some people have used a small bit of silicone grease for plumbers, and they put a little silicone grease around the thread before they put the cap on. It's okay if the cap is stuck, because if the cap is stuck, you can take a pair of pliers, and this is plastic, and just kind of not crank down on it, but kind of squeeze it a little bit
Yep.
and then whoop, there it goes.
I've even used a little tiny bit of cooking oil just
Okay,
around the thread,
Yeah.
and it works for me.
works for you.
I
All
didn't
right.
do that on this one, clearly.
Very cool.
So yeah.
Awesome. So the main objective, or one of your core objectives with SeaTak, is of course coral reef restoration and helping to outplant more corals quicker, and just a more efficient way of setting up the reefs. And then also the hobbyist side that you talked about, providing a coral glue for us as hobbyists to frag our corals, glue them down. Now with the all right, so how can the hobbyist help contribute or support? Like when we buy a tube of SeaTak, is some of those proceeds going to coral reef restoration, or is it just directly impacting that or helping with that because the product is being used to plant corals?
Right. Really, really good question. And I'm going to tell you to stay tuned.
Okay.
And so we are trying to address this right now. And I'm in April, I'm setting you up to talk. So as we thought about, and as I mentioned before, in the reef restoration community, 98% of the groups are not well funded, and they have to make trade-offs. And so, how do we support, or how are we trying to do that?
Yeah, it's been a big problem. We've had people who have built businesses in the industries, suggest to practitioners, hey, think of maybe, building a business. But a lot of them are into more the philanthropic side of things, and that's just not their thing. But it's still something that we need to look at, because they do need adhesive. They do need a lot of help doing the work that they're doing out in the ocean. And so
Right.
we've
So
been working closely with them to try to problem solve some ideas. And we've got a couple ideas that have been running around in our heads, and we're working with a couple groups to see if we can execute these. But it's still something we're working on. In the meantime, though, we send quite a bit of glue out to the reefs on our own expense.
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yep. But we're thinking about, do we set up a separate 501c3
Yep.
not for profit that
Right.
would, for every tube of glue that is sold, Muscle
Right.
Polymers donates $1 to, or some number to
Mhm.
the not for profit, and then
Right.
we've engaged a couple of groups to help us with that, because that's something that we're not experts in.
Right.
And so back to the original answer is, yeah, that's a really good point, and stay tuned, because that's
We
that's
are
right. Now
working on it.
there is an education element to this as well. So we've got a specific group out of Hawaii that is going from um, restoration activity to restoration activity, teaching them on the effective ways, the proper ways of technique and what works. So there's some of that as well.
Our
Okay.
practitioners are the ones we generally are educating. They're not
Mhm.
necessarily the ones outplanting. So there's a bit of a gap there to getting proper education to citizen scientists.
Yep.
Okay.
People like you and me who want to really help out,
Hmm.
Yep. That's true.
So for the Aquarius, or for the hobbyist that is looking to, I guess, further their education on coral restoration, or to jump in and see more about what SeaTak is all about, what are some of the places they can go to find that information, and how can they get their hands on SeaTak?
Fantastic. You can go to SeaTak.com. There's actually quite a few videos on there about SeaTak, how to use SeaTak. You can also order at SeaTak.com.
And
Yeah.
there are several retail establishments. We have a running list on that website of who's carrying things.
Yes.
Um, and it's available directly. And and we can direct some of your listeners to places where they could procure it as well.
Right. If you can't find it
Yep.
locally, you can get it online from us.
Okay, very cool. And I'll link some of those in the description below for you guys to check that out as well. In closing, is there anything that you would like to add on to the goals of SeaTak, what SeaTak is trying to accomplish, how to use SeaTak for the reef hobbyist, or the coral reef restoration projects, or someone involved with that that's listening to this podcast?
My thought was, if you're into coral reef as a hobby, fantastic. Like, get your fingers on it, work with it, try it out, understand it. We're happy to answer questions, and I think it'll also be helpful with understanding a bigger issue that we are all affected by, is the decline of the coral reefs, and how do we show up as citizens to help in that. And so I think getting really familiar with um, using SeaTak, because it is the only underwater adhesive really made for underwater coral restoration, that can help in moving towards bigger solutions and education, for all of us to be able to make a difference.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, David and April, for coming on the podcast and sharing about SeaTak and how it's being used in coral reef restoration around the world, and how we can use it as hobbyists as well. So thank you so much.
You're certainly welcome.